No sound. Thank you, Jill. That better? We'll have to wait a 15-second delay because there's a delay. It's like traveling to the moon and back. Hmm. I timed it really well, but I didn't unmute my mic. So, can you hear me now? Much. I don't know what that means, Jill. What does much mean? Um, can you hear me now? That is not. I thought someone might be texting me to tell me that they can hear me. Okay, great. You can hear me now. Awesome. So like and subscribe. Coffee and Conversations. You missed my bit about water and the word and teaching and tea and coffee and conversations and Bibles and beverages. Anyhow, don't forget if you have a question in the midst of the stream or you're like, hey, I've been thinking about this question. I want to ask it. Throw it in the chat and I will endeavor to answer them at the end to the best of my ability. Or I will tell you I don't know and I will get you an answer or maybe not. So, couple of announcements before we get going. On 9/8, so September 8th, we're having our fall kickoff. That's when kind of all the ministry calendar stuff starts for the ministry calendar year. Branch groups will kick back off that day. We're going to have an extended fellowship potluck after service, so we want you to be there. The church is going to provide the hamburgers and hot dogs and the fixings for those, but you'll need to provide a side dish or desserts. More info on that will to come, and it's going to be a great time. And then the following Friday, the Friday after that, we're going to have a night of worship, and then youth group will kick off the following Sunday, and young adults ministry will kick off the following Sunday. And so we got a bunch of stuff coming up for that with the ministry calendar year. I hope you'll plan to be there. I hope you'll plan to jump in and get involved. If you're not in a branch group, I'd encourage you to get into one and join one. It's a way that you can fellowship and be with other believers and encourage them and be encouraged by them and minister to one another's needs in a way that goes deeper and beyond what happens on Sunday morning. And really, it's a way that you can grow and you can minister to other people. It's actually going to be a point that our text this coming Sunday kind of emphasizes, is that the ministry of the body is not just done by the staff or the paid professionals or the pastors, but by the whole body. And so we need to collectively be involved in that. So I hope you'll plan to participate and come that Sunday and get involved. One thing I didn't write down, though, is I'm going to write it down, 7th, church work day. Boom. I'm adding there. So on September 7th, we're having a church work day. I hope you'll plan to help with that as we kind of clean up the church for before we kick off the fall stuff. There's all those little things that you have to do from time to time to keep the facility nice, and we want to do those things. And then we have some side projects we're working on. So we hope that you'll plan to participate with that too. But with all that said, we're going to take a break from Coffee and Conversations until 9:10. That's Tuesday after. Why am I doing nervous movement? 9:10. We're going to we're going to take a break from today until then, so that way we can get stuff ready for fall kickoff. And there's extra kind of administrative stuff that has to go on with that, and just a variety of things. So no Coffee and Conversations next week on not the 20th. Today's the 20th, on the 27th or the 3rd. But then we'll be back on the 10th. So if you try to show up here next week, you're not going to do anything because there's no stream. And then if you tried to show up on the 3rd, there won't be anything on the 3rd either. So anyhow, we'll see you back on the 10th for that. And then we're going to be in Acts chapter 21, verses 27 to 36 today. And I know this is going to shock you, but Paul is falsely accused. He is, that's not where I want that. Because I do like the Anaheim Ducks, but I don't want a duck head. Sorry, I'm swirling today. The church, so Paul is falsely accused. Paul is in Jerusalem. He's met with James. He's met with the elders of the church, and they've instructed him to go and fulfill a vow. And so he's in the midst of doing that, and he gets falsely accused by some people that recognize him. And so let's jump in and see what happens to the Apostle Paul. So it says 7 days were almost complete. So these are Paul's 7 days of purification. And this is actually something that you would do as what Jewish people would do is if they went into foreign Gentile country, if they went into areas where the Jewish law was not the law of the land, they would purify themselves when they returned back to Jerusalem on the off chance that they inadvertently were defiled as a result of being in Gentile foreign soil, or just from the fact that they are interacting with Gentiles. You see this actually early on in Acts where Peter and Cornelius, Peter says, hey, look, according to our laws, it's not even right for me to eat with you as a Gentile. And yet here I am. Like God has shown us that it is actually okay for Jews and Gentiles to interact and fellowship with one another. And so Paul is completing this day of purification. That little squiggly line is going to bother me because it's not straight. So 7 days were almost complete. The Jews from Asia, so this is most likely Ephesus, where Paul spent 3 years, and he reasoned with them, and he pleaded with them, and he did his ministry. So there are Jews who have come to Jerusalem for Pentecost, for the sake of worship and obeying the Old Testament law. They're coming to Jerusalem to partake in this festival, and they're like, we know that dude. He was in Ephesus for 3 years. He was teaching people about Jesus, and he was reasoning with them and pleading with them to put faith in Christ. And they recognize him, and they see him in the temple. And they stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him. And look at what they say. So they laid hands on, they stirred up the crowd and they laid hands on him. This is intended to sound like what happens to, I need to click that off. There we go. This is intended to be and feel and sound like something similar that happened to Stephen. And then also we're going to see some allusion to what happens to Jesus in later on in the section. So they lay hands on him and they're crying out, men of Israel. Good grief, that was terrible. Men of Israel, help. This man who is teaching everyone everywhere against the people, the law, and this place. Notice what they're making accusations against. They're saying he's teaching against the people and against the law and against this place, none of which can be is true. Paul is not teaching against the Jewish people. Paul is not teaching against the law, and he is not teaching against the temple. He is actually fulfilling all those things in his attempt to fulfill this vow. He is not working against these things. Moreover, he even brought Greeks into the temple and defiled this place. He's not doing that either. He knows better. There are warning signs as you are walking into the temple. There would actually be warning signs in the temple in Greek and Latin saying, if you're a Gentile and you violate this, you cross this boundary, it's your own fault and it will lead to your death. So if a Gentile went from the court of the Gentiles into the court of the women in the temple, they were taking their life into their own hands and they would be executed. And Rome would allow that execution. That violation was so important to temple understanding. The Romans allowed local religious practices to execute people for doing that. And so the Jews are accusing Paul of this. And for they had previously seen Trophimus, the Ephesian, with him in the city. So they've seen a Gentile with Paul, and so they say, well, clearly he must have taken this man in. That they have no ability to see Paul accurately or correctly. They just assume that Paul is going to break the law. They just heap up these accusations. Sometimes our perception of people can cause us to see them inaccurately. This is what's happening here. They are assuming the worst. They are not assuming positive intent. They are assuming that Paul is doing these negative things. And so they are going to rile themselves up. And they assume that Paul brought him into the temple, but he didn't. Then all the city was stirred up, and the people ran together. They seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple. And at once the gates were shut. So they closed the gates. I'm having a terrible time today. That they closed the gates so that way the event doesn't spill into part of the temple. It could also be that they're trying to prevent Paul from escaping. And so they have these huge gates that are like ginormous. I can't remember the exact dimensions of them, but they were large, and it wouldn't be something quick that would happen, or wouldn't be easy. It would take multiple people to shut it. And so they're closing the gates to prevent it from spilling into the temple court, and to perhaps prevent Paul from escaping. If Paul has violated the temple, then the only way the temple is restored is upon his death. But Paul hasn't done that, and so we're not really sure exactly why they did it, but that's a potential. And so the doors are shut, and they were seeking to kill him. And word came to the tribune of the cohort that all of Jerusalem was in confusion. So at the temple, there was a tower that would hold a Roman cohort, which is 480 to 600 soldiers. And it was on the northwest corner. I can't remember specifically where it was, but it was elevated up. So that way the Roman centurion and the Roman soldiers could actually look down and see the whole temple court and keep an eye on things. And from there, they observe that there's a ruckus going on. There is a riot in the temple. Something is afoot, and they don't allow that. They're not going to let that happen, because their job is to maintain order. And the best way to maintain order in this situation, in these times, was to quell the crowd early on. They would use force. They wouldn't just allow it to proceed. It's you get it done while it's in the early stages, rather than letting it run amok and then trying to deal with it. They start strong, and then they will relax, rather than go lax and then have to ramp things up. And so they rush down the stairs, and they get into the temple area. And when they saw the tribune and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. So they're no longer going to attempt to kill him in this moment, but they stop. And their intent was to kill Paul. Same thing with Stephen and Jesus. The tribune came up and arrested him. He's like, hey, this guy's the problem. We got to take care of him and figure out what's going on. So they arrest him and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. It probably means that he's chained between 2 soldiers, and they will hold him together. And so that way, if anyone tries to attack Paul, they're also probably attacking the soldiers. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to make the Roman centurions, the Roman soldiers, angry, because they've got more swords, they've got more spears, they've got better armor, and they will deal with you, and they're not going to be nice about it. They will make examples of those who try to hurt them. And so they carried Paul, they bound him in chains, and he's trying, the tribune is trying to figure out what's going on. And so he's trying to figure out who Paul was and what he has done. And in the midst of the uproar, in the midst of the chaos, he can't hear. It's like everyone is shouting, and it's like, what is happening? And so he starts to take different actions. So some in the crowd were shouting one thing and some another. And as he could not learn the facts because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought into the barracks. Notice that That's somewhat similar to what happens to Jesus. There are different people offering different accounts of what he's done wrong, and he's being falsely accused. Paul is like Jesus in this instance, in that he's being falsely accused by people of something he hasn't actually done. And so the the tribune, gathers Paul, and he ordered him to be brought into the barracks so he could investigate. He needs to figure out what this man is accused of and what he has done wrong. Rome was very orderly, and they went by the book, and he needs to figure out what's going on so he can ascertain what's the appropriate response. When he came to the steps, he was actually carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the crowd. So the soldiers are like, we got to get this guy out of here, and we're going to pick him up and carry him. Expediency is the name of the game at this point. Get him out of the riot, because the riot will calm down as Paul is removed from it. They might be able to set up a defense perimeter and block people from getting in the doors. And so they are seeking to dissuade the crowd and figure out what's going on so that they can make the appropriate decision in the moment. And in the midst of that, the following for the mob of people followed, crying out, "Away with him!" That's what the crowd uttered about Jesus. Luke is making an allusion that Paul is like Jesus. He's not saying he is a Christ figure, but there is similarity. There are similarities between what is happening to Paul here and what happened to Jesus. And we should not be shocked that a Jesus follower experiences something that Jesus himself experienced. We're told in the Gospels that Jesus says, if you want to follow me, you have to pick up your cross. Jesus says, in this life, you will have trouble. Jesus says, if they persecuted me, they will persecute you. When we look at the lives of the apostles in the early church, we see examples of individuals experiencing things similar to Christ in a way that we often don't. Friends, we are called to emulate and be like Christ, and that includes experiencing suffering, that includes experiencing tribulation, that includes experiencing trials and tribulations and being reviled for righteousness. We are called to experience those things. If we want to follow Jesus well, we need to be prepared for those things. The Christian life is not your best life now. It's not about having all your hopes and dreams and desires fulfilled in this life. It's about becoming more like Jesus and following him and looking to him as our example, and putting our faith, hope, and trust in him. So as believers, we need to be prepared to suffer like he did, because a student is not better than his master. We need to be ready for those things, knowing that they will come, knowing that they're promised. But in those moments, we count it joy when we experience trials of various kinds. It's going to come at us, so we need to be ready. And Paul is an example of that in this text, in this passage, in his real life that he actually lived. He is a testimony to the enduring power of faith in what it means to trust Christ in all circumstances. And so we need to have the same attitude, same mind. And I hope that the Lord is working in your life in that way to enable you and empower you to endure whatever he brings your way. And then when we come back in September, we're going to see how Paul responds. Paul actually gets the opportunity to preach to the crowd in this moment, before he's taken away and put in custody in a more permanent sense. So don't forget about fall kickoff, and don't forget about that we have no coffee and conversations until after fall kickoff. Friends, I hope this will be an encouragement to you that not that life is going to be free of trouble, but that the Lord will carry you through in it. Trust your faith, rest in the Lord, and he will enable you to endure the worst of circumstances as you emulate our Savior. Our friends, hope you have a great rest of your week and a couple weeks, I guess. And then I will see you on Sunday at church.